1/100th of a second. That is all that separated Max Verstappen's pole position from Oscar Piastri in the McLaren in second place. And where was Lando Norris? 10th, crashed out. We're going to talk about all of that. We're going to look at some telemetry. This is Sector 1 of the Jeddah Corniche Circuit 2025. In blue, we've got Max Verstappen. In papaya, orange, call it what you will, we have Oscar Piastri. Speed is at the top. We've got the delta underneath that. We've got throttle and brake inputs underneath that. On this trace, the speed trace is actually probably the most important, but I will look at some of the throttle and brake inputs as well. The first thing to draw your attention to is the end of straight speed going into turn 1, and you can see that Max is quite a lot quicker at the end of that straight, about 7 kilometers per hour. This is the view that Max had going down the pit straight to start his lap. And that little speck you can see, that's Yuki Tsunoda giving him a cheeky little toe. And I think that explains the speed differential going into that corner. But don't let anyone tell you that that was the only reason that Max Verstappen was so quick across Sector 1. He was a 1/10 and a half quicker than Oscar Piastri, and it's not just because he got a toe into turn 1. Let's have a look at the rest of the lap. I'm going to ignore 1, 2 and 3 for a second, and I want to draw your attention to turn 4. So Sector 1 is made up of that turn 1, 2, 3 complex, and then there's a braking moment into turn 4, then some medium speed corners that are taking full throttle 5 and 6, and then there's either a lift or a braking moment into turn 7, and you have another set of medium speed corners before you head off to the banked hairpin of turn 13. So into turn 4, let's have a look at the speed trace first of all. You can see that Max carries a higher minimum speed through that corner, but Oscar actually gets a slightly better exit, and his speed coming out of turn 4 and through the medium speed corners is actually higher than Max. So how does that happen? So Max comes off the throttle later, he brakes later. He's really piling hard into that corner, and you can see on the speed trace how much more speed he carries into the corner. There's a huge amount of confidence in the car on the way in. He then loses a bit of speed here and picks up the throttle a bit later, and that's where Oscar starts to do his thing. So Oscar comes off the throttle a bit earlier, brakes a bit earlier, but brakes for less time. He's much more classically coming off the throttle and then coming back off onto the throttle again as he exits the corner, whereas Max is balancing the throttle and the brake off each other to give him that higher minimum speed. Let's have a look at turn 7. So turn 7, here you can see that Max does the same thing again. He's balancing brake and throttle off against each other to keep the car on a knife edge, and he's having a higher minimum speed across that corner, whereas Oscar doesn't brake at all. Actually. He just comes off the throttle a little bit, off the throttle a lot, and then has a little bit of a moment just at the exit of turn 7. But he has much more of a giant confidence lift rather than balancing the car to get it through the corner, and his minimum speed is slightly less. Now, I think that Max's approach is a much more knife edge, much more aggressive way of using the car. It's a 10/10ths way of driving the car, if you will, whereas Oscar's way of driving is much more 8 or 9/10ths. And I think this is the reason that Lando had a big crash in Q3 and Oscar is 100th off pole. Neither is perfect, but Oscar's way of doing it at least keeps him in the game. Andrea Stella said something about Lando Norris and his problems after qualifying. What he said was that Lando's a very fast driver, but he'll pour the car into the corner. He'll absolutely nail it into the corner in the way that Max Verstappen has done into turn 4 here. But sometimes the car responds unpredictably. It responds in a way that Lando doesn't expect it to do. And that's what happened, I think, in turn 4. He went in too hot into turn 4. It understeered. He then lost the rear end. And then, bam, he ends up in the wall. Whereas Oscar doesn't take that risk. Oscar comes off the throttle a bit earlier, brakes a bit earlier. And then once he's happy that the rear is settled, he then powers out the corner. Whereas Max, you can see, doesn't do that. Max is willing the car to turn in hard with that pointy rear front end. He lets the rear end do what it's going to do because he knows he can live with it. And then as soon as he's happy that the car's straight, bang, he's on the throttle again and out he goes. It gives him that higher minimum speed. That's what Lando is trying to do as well. When he said after Melbourne, he said, look, I don't want them to give me a car that's easy to drive. He said, just make the fastest car you can and I'll live with it. But what he's doing is he's not living with it. He's not able to unlock that last little bit of potential in the way that Max Verstappen can with the RB21. And Oscar, rather than even approaching that, is saying, well, there's no point in me doing that. There's enough base performance in this car for me to live within its limits, 8 to 9 tenths, and then end up maybe 100th off pole, maybe not hitting the ultimate potential of this car, but not so far off that it's not competitive. And also not throwing himself off the road. So that then does beg the question, what would happen if Max Verstappen was in this car? It's a question that he raised. He said, look, if I was in the MCL 39, I'd be 20, 30 seconds down the road. To which Lando's laughed and said, well, I'd love to see him in that car. I'd love to see his face when he gets out of it. This kind of tells me that actually a driver like Max, who has that sensitivity for when the rear end is going to just break loose or when it's going to do what he wants it to do, the way he has manipulated it to do, might be able to get that last little tenth out of it, that last little bit that Lando's trying to do, but when he does, puts him in the wall. And that limit that Oscar isn't quite willing to approach because he doesn't want to go in the wall. Does Max bridge that gap? Will Lando be able to bridge it as we go forwards? I don't know. This is one of those things that's inbuilt into your bum, into the base of your spine from a young age. I'm not sure that Lando can develop it over the course of this season, and I don't think that Oscar is willing to go to that. So it may be that we're going to see this pattern throughout the course of the season where one team's drivers either are pushing too hard or not pushing hard enough, but have enough in the car to maintain performance, versus Max, who is pushing absolutely everything out of the car that he's been given, even if it doesn't quite have the ultimate potential that the McLaren does. I think it's going to be a fascinating race. I think qualifying sessions from here on in are going to be absolutely mega to watch. Let's see how this goes. As usual, please like, please subscribe, please leave us a comment. We'll read every single one. We'll reply to as many as we possibly can, and we will see you guys in the next one.